Right now, as you are listening to this, nearly 50 million American families believe they are standing on the edge of a life-changing inheritance. They believe a transfer of wealth is coming that will finally reward decades of work, patience, and loyalty to the system. They are wrong, and by the time most of them realize it, the window to act will already be closed. $124 trillion. That is not a headline number. That is not a metaphor. According to a 2024 analysis by Cerulli Associates, that is the precise amount of wealth projected to change hands in the United States by the year 2048. The media calls it the greatest wealth transfer in history. It sounds generous. It sounds hopeful. It sounds like a rising tide lifting all boats. But this is not a transfer. It is a consolidation. A slow, mechanical, mathematically predictable concentration of wealth that has played out before, again and again, across civilizations separated by centuries, continents, and cultures. If you believe you are on the receiving end of this event, there is something you need to understand immediately. You are not watching wealth move from one generation to another. You are watching it compress, harden, and concentrate into fewer and fewer hands. And there is a pattern to how this happens. A pattern so consistent that once you recognize it, you can see it unfolding in real time. A four-stage sequence that has hollowed out the middle class of every major civilization that ever mistook monetary expansion for prosperity. Empires do not usually collapse from invasion first. They collapse from arithmetic. Stage one always begins the same way. Trust. A nation establishes a currency anchored to something real. Gold, silver, land. Something finite. Something that cannot be created at will. This anchor creates confidence. Trade expands. Productivity rises. A middle class forms. Savings mean something. The system feels stable, even permanent. People begin to believe the good times are normal. Stage two arrives quietly. Almost politely. The state faces rising costs. Wars. Expanding borders. Social promises. Bureaucracies that never shrink. Rather than confront the political pain of higher taxes or reduced spending, governments choose a softer option. They dilute the currency. Precious metal content is reduced. Paper claims multiply. New money enters the system faster than real value can be created. Officials insist nothing has changed. But it has. Stage three is where control is lost. Inflation accelerates. Prices rise faster than wages. Savings erode invisibly at first, then violently. Those who trusted the currency, who did everything right, who stored their labor in cash and bonds, are wiped out. Meanwhile, those closest to money creation, asset holders, landowners, politically connected institutions, survive. More than that, they consolidate. Stage four is the reset. A new monetary system emerges. Sometimes it is a new currency. Sometimes it is a new rule set. But by the time it arrives, the damage is already done. Wealth has moved from millions to thousands. The system restarts. The people are told stability has returned, and most never fully understand what happened. This is not theory. Let me show you. Rome, 64 AD. The city is burning. Emperor Nero is desperate for funds. The Roman denarius, once the most trusted currency in the known world, had been nearly pure silver under Augustus, about 95%. Nero reduced it to roughly 80%. That was not collapse. That was stage two. Over the next century, the process accelerated. Under Septimius Severus, the same coin contained less than 50% silver. In 215 AD, Emperor Caracalla introduced a new coin, the Antoninianus, officially worth 2 denarii. In reality, it contained only 1.5 times the silver, a legal fiction backed by imperial decree. By 253 AD, silver content had fallen to 20%. A decade later, it dropped to around 2%. 2%. Prices exploded. Inflation surged by more than 1,000%. Small landholders were destroyed. Soldiers demanded payment in goods. Taxes were collected in kind. The Roman middle class vanished. Those who held land and gold survived. They absorbed property. They gained political leverage. The empire weakened beyond repair. Check the stages. Trusted silver currency. Verified. Debasement to fund expansion and war. Verified. Inflation and destruction of currency-based wealth. Verified. Reset and consolidation. Complete. Now move forward. Germany, 1921 to 1923. After World War I, Germany owed 132 billion gold marks in reparations. That is over 500 billion in today's terms. During the war, Germany had abandoned the gold standard. After the war, it was required to pay in gold-backed currency it no longer possessed. The Weimar government faced a choice: raise taxes sharply, cut spending brutally, or print money. They printed. By mid-1922, The exchange rate reached 320 marks per dollar. 6 months later, 7,400 marks per dollar. In January 1923, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr industrial region. Germany responded by printing even more money to pay striking workers. By November 1923, one United States dollar equaled 4.2 trillion marks. A loaf of bread that cost 160 marks at the end of 1922 now cost 200 billion marks. Families who had saved for generations were erased in months. Anyone holding cash was destroyed. Anyone holding land, gold, or foreign currency survived. Wealth transferred upward at a speed rarely seen in history. Again, check the stages. Gold-backed system, expansion and paper money. Hyperinflation, reset with the Rentenmark, pattern confirmed. Now, the modern world. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon addresses the nation and suspends the convertibility of the dollar into gold. For 27 years, under the Bretton Woods system, the dollar had been anchored at $35 per ounce of gold. Every major currency was pegged to it. This was the foundation of the post-war financial order. But by 1971, the United States was bleeding gold. War spending in Vietnam, social programs, persistent trade deficits, foreign governments began demanding gold instead of paper. On August 11th, Britain alone requested $3 billion worth of gold from Fort Knox. 4 days later, the gold window closed. The dollar became a fiat currency overnight. Within 15 months, Bretton Woods collapsed. Inflation surged through the 1970s. Purchasing power fell. Savers lost ground. Asset holders gained. The wealth gap widened systematically, not by accident, but by design. And that brings us to today, the $124 trillion event everyone is talking about. As of 2024, the top 1% of Americans hold over 30% of all wealth, nearly $50 trillion. The bottom half of the population holds less than 3%. Total household wealth stands at $163 trillion, inflated by soaring stock markets and real estate. Here's what breaks the illusion. More than $60 trillion of the projected transfer comes from the wealthiest 2% alone. Millennials and Generation Z expect to inherit tens of trillions. But studies show only a fraction of families actually plan to leave anything. The median inheritance for the bottom 90% is close to zero. This is not a windfall for the many. It is a consolidation for the few. And it follows the same 4 stages. You might feel the tension now, the sense that this story is not finished yet, because it is not. Look closely at where we are in the pattern right now, because this is the part most people refuse to acknowledge while they are living inside it. Stage 1 for the United States already happened. After World War II, the dollar became the backbone of the global system. Under Bretton Woods, it was trusted, gold-backed, and accepted everywhere. For decades, saving dollars meant storing real value. That trust built the largest middle class in human history. This is not debated. This is documented. Stage 2 began quietly after 1971. Once the dollar was no longer tied to gold, something fundamental changed. Money was no longer constrained by physical reality. It became elastic, expandable, convenient. Over the next 5 decades, deficit spending became normal. Wars were financed without taxes. Crises were solved with liquidity. Every recession was met with lower interest rates and larger balance sheets. The Federal Reserve expanded the money supply again and again. National debt climbed past $36 trillion. Each new dollar diluted the purchasing power of the last. Nothing collapsed overnight, which is why most people missed it. Inflation does not feel like theft at first. It feels like background noise. But stage 3 is never subtle. Real wages in the United States have stagnated for decades when adjusted for purchasing power. Housing prices detached from income. Education costs exploded. Healthcare became unaffordable. Meanwhile, asset prices surged. Stocks, real estate, private equity. Anything scarce rose faster than wages ever could. This is the moment where the pattern reveals its cruelty. Those who save in currency fall behind every year. Those who own assets move ahead without lifting a finger. The gap widens not because of effort or intelligence, but because of position. The top 1% now controls as much wealth as the bottom 90% combined. That is not coincidence. That is stage 3. And now we are entering stage 4. This is the part history books usually summarize in a single paragraph, long after the damage is done. The reset does not always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like normalization. A new baseline where inequality is accepted as inevitable, where ownership is concentrated, where most people rent access to a system they once believed they owned a piece of. The so-called great wealth transfer is not breaking this pattern. It is completing it. The narrative says trillions will move from older generations to younger ones. The reality is that most of that wealth is already concentrated at the top, and it will largely stay there. Trust structures, tax strategies, asset appreciation, medical costs, long-term care. These forces quietly pull wealth upward before it ever reaches the next generation. Millions are planning their futures around inheritances that statistically will never arrive. This is where people usually object. They say this time is different. They say America is exceptional. That technology changes the rules. That innovation saves us. Rome said that. Weimar Germany said that. Every civilization believes its moment is unique. The pattern does not care. It does not care about optimism or national identity. It responds only to mathematics. When a currency is debased, savers lose, and asset holders win. Every single time. Across 2,000 years. With no exceptions. This is the uncomfortable truth. If your wealth exists primarily as cash, savings accounts, or fixed income instruments that do not outpace inflation, you are positioned exactly where history says you should not be. Not because you made bad choices, but because the system quietly changed around you. The pattern shows this with brutal clarity. Currency debasement transfers wealth from those who hold money to those who hold things. Land, businesses, equities, commodities. Assets that cannot be printed into existence. The $124 trillion everyone is talking about is not flowing toward you. It is being siphoned past you. And unless you understand how this machine works, you are not inheriting wealth. You are funding someone else's. So, what does history suggest you do when you finally recognize the pattern? First, stop waiting. Waiting for an inheritance. Waiting for fairness. Waiting for the system to reverse itself. It never does. Second, understand that saving alone is no longer protection. In a fiat system, savings without ownership are slowly consumed by time and policy. Third, position yourself where the pattern consistently rewards people. Ownership over promises, assets over paper, scarcity over abundance. This is not speculation, this is observation. The same forces that hollowed out Roman savers, erased the German middle class, and reshaped America after 1971 are still operating today. More quietly, more efficiently, with better branding. The machine was not built in 2024. It was built centuries ago. It is operating exactly as designed. What you are witnessing now is not a windfall. It is the endgame. And the only real question left is not whether the pattern will complete. History already answered that. The question is whether you will recognize it in time to choose where you stand when it does. The machine was not built in 2024. It was built centuries ago. It is operating exactly as designed. What you are witnessing now is not a windfall. It is the endgame of a cycle that has repeated from Rome to Weimar Germany to post-gold standard America, and now to the present day. History does not warn loudly. It whispers. It leaves patterns behind and waits to see who is paying attention. This channel exists for one reason: to decode those patterns, to strip away the comforting narratives, and to show you how power, money, and incentives actually move beneath the surface of history. If you want to understand what comes next, not speculation, not hype, but pattern recognition, grounded in 2,000 years of economic behavior, then stay here. Subscribe to this channel. In the next episode, we will break down how this machine was constructed, who benefits from it, and the 3 structural decisions that quietly determine whether you are drained by the system or positioned ahead of it before the final stage fully locks in. This is not financial advice. This is historical awareness.